So we talked about the first step being private pilot. So I'm going to make this course around becoming a private pilot. Now the process is going to be pretty much the same if you want to become a commercial pilot or even an airline transport pilot. These steps are also going to apply. When you want to become a private pilot, you're going to have to do two things. You're going to have to receive ground training and you're going to have to receive flight training. The ground training is going to be done through a ground school. The ground school is going to help you pass what we call the aeronautical knowledge test. This is something that the FAA is going to have you do. It's a multiple choice test. I'm going to talk about it in a second. The second part of this is flight training. You need to go to a flight school, and the flight school is going to put you in an airplane and teach you how to fly the airplane. The ground training is more like a knowledge kind of training. The flight training is more of a practical kind of thing. At the end of flight training, you're going to have to do a practical exam. So I'm going to talk about this as well in a minute. So let's start with the written exam. Aeronautical knowledge test is the actual words from the FAA. We call it a written exam. It's the same thing. It's going to be 60 questions, multiple choice. It's 100 questions for commercial, but for private, it's 60. You have 2 hours to complete it, and you have to get at least 70% to pass. If you do not get 70%, then you have to get recurrent training and then go take the test again. There's, at the moment, as I'm recording this, there's only one approved vendor that will provide the testing. It's not us, not Pilot Institute. It's actually CATS Test. So CATS and PSI combined, there used to be two, now it's only one. And you can go to their website, catstest.com, and you can find if there's a testing center near you. You will need to take the test at the testing center. It is not provided online. The cost for the test is $160. If you fail the first test, you lost $160, you have to pay again the $160. So it's pretty important. It's not a cheap expense in this case. People say all the time, how do I study for this test? Well, you're in luck because this is what we specialize in. This is what I've been doing for the last almost 20 years. There's 4 different ways that you can study for the written exam. First one is to self-study. Now I'm going to skip this one very quickly because I've never met anyone in my life that has passed the written exam by self-studying. I'm not saying they're not out there, but it's extremely difficult. There's a lot of documentation to go through, and there's a lot of things that you have to know what you're looking for. So it's not easy and it's very time consuming. The next way you can do the written exam or train for the written exam is by doing an in-person class. This is something that's offered usually by flight schools. They meet in the evening during the week, and it's a 2, 3, 4-hour session where you're going to learn about specific topic. I've done this. I used to do this as a flight instructor, as a ground instructor in this case, for flight school, and we'd do it on Wednesdays and Fridays, and we would do it at 6 p.m. in the evening, so people that were working could come in and do the test, and we would do it for 3 hours in a row. Another way that you can study for this is doing one-on-one training with the flight instructor. I've done that also with my students, and not something that I really enjoy because it's just very time consuming, and I'll tell you a little in a minute the advantages and the disadvantages of doing this. And the last way is to do an online ground school. Now this is what we specialize in. This is what I do, what I recorded these courses. This is the reason why I recorded these courses is because I think it's actually the most efficient way of learning. Now I'm biased obviously, but again, I've been doing this for a long time. Let's talk about the advantages. Advantages of doing this either in person, in the ground school environment, in a class, or doing it one-on-one with a flight instructor is that you can actually get immediate answers from the person that's in front of you. Something you don't understand, you can raise your hand and then the person will answer the question immediately. Another advantage is the fact that it can be more airplane specific. You're flying at a flight school and they have a specific airplane. In the ground school, they are likely going to tell you about the airplane. It can also be more specific about the airport where you're going to be flying, and also more specific about the school in itself and the procedures that are offered by the school. So it does have advantages. It's not all bad. Now, some of the disadvantages of doing this in person, for example, in the classroom. The major downside that I've seen is the fact that you have to basically follow the schedule that's given to you. Okay, if these ground schools are done in the evening and one night you don't want to go, you're missing basically that entire session, and then you're going to have to either make it up or do it yourself in self-study, or even pay a fly instructor to do it again. So not the best in this case. Also, another disadvantage is you can't rewind, you can't pause, and you can't basically just review the information again because, well, the person is talking in front of you, and if you're not taking notes, then you're basically losing the knowledge that was in there. So also, you can't stop. If you're being overwhelmed, if you had a long day in the office and you're going into the ground school, then all of a sudden, if there's just too much information, you're falling asleep. I've had students fall asleep in class, not because of me, I hope, but just because they're tired. I mean, it happens at the end of a day or right after lunch, whatever it is, then it becomes an issue. So that's the main disadvantage with doing it with a ground school in a classroom. You could do it one-on-one. The big disadvantage of the one-on-one is the cost. A fly instructor is about $60 to $70 an hour that you're going to pay. Our ground school, for example, is 35 hours. So 35 hours at this price is a little over $2,000. You're going to spend over $2,000 for one-on-one flight training with a fly instructor. And that's going to be based on the instructor's availability. I can tell you one thing. As a fly instructor, you want to be flying because remember what I said earlier, fly instructors are building flight time to go to the airlines. Every hour they spend at the flight school, they want to be in an airplane because, well, they want to get out and go fly for an airline. So that's a big disadvantage. And also it's going to be whiteboard teaching. Instructor is going to be in a little cubicle in most cases, and they're going to be writing on the board and then explaining to you the things. It's not the best way to learn. Like I said, I've done this before. I'd never liked it as a fly instructor, and I don't think the students really got the most out of it for what they paid for it. It's also difficult to give quizzes to the students in this case because, well, you would have to print them. There's just not an easy way to teach in this case. So that's the disadvantage right here. Talking about ground schools, online ground schools like what we do at Pilot Institute, usually a lot cheaper. We charge, in this case, a one-time fee, and that's it. That's all you have to pay, and then you have access to the content forever. It's a lifetime access, which again is in your advantage because you can go back anytime you want. You can watch the videos as many times as you want and also from anywhere. If you're at home, if you're in the bus, if you're in an airplane, in a train, well, it doesn't matter where you are. You can actually watch the videos from there. You can also get free support. We do not charge extra to help our students. So if you have a question, you just leave it right there and then we're going to respond. Like I said, you can use this several months later if you have a refresher, even 2 years down the road. You haven't flown in a while and you want to get a refresher. We keep our courses up to date. And not just us, actually any online ground school out there, I hope, are keeping their courses up to date. So this is a good way to do this and stay up to date with the information. Also, we have a ton of quizzes available, all right? In the private pilot, we have over 800 questions that you can use to quiz yourself, so that's a big plus. And not only that, but you have access to our community where we have thousands of students in the course, and if you want to share information, if you want to sell something, if you want to buy something, any supplies, then you can do it through the community. So those are the big advantages. There are disadvantages, and quite frankly, not a whole lot of them, but the biggest one is if you want an immediate answer, then it's going to be a little bit harder. It takes us a few hours to reply to comments. So that's the downside right here. If you want an answer, a question answered immediately, then it's going to take a little bit longer. The next question that we get a lot is, when should you pass the written exam? And the written exam is what you're going to do at the end of our ground training. You're basically going to go with the FAA, with the testing center, and pass your written exam. We recommend that you do it before or right after your first solo. So that's going to be in the first quarter of your flight training. That's when you should go and take your written exam. The reason we say this is because we want to give you all the knowledge you can before you go fly by yourself. And not only that, we want you to get it out of the way so that you don't have to worry about ground school anymore. And so you have most of the knowledge in your head so you can save money with your fly instructor when you go fly. So that's what we recommend at this stage. Your written exam is good for 2 years. So that gives you plenty of time to finish your flight training. And then you'll need to have that written exam by the time you go for the final check with the FAA. and you do your flight check, your practical test. So that's it. That's kind of what we recommend with this. In terms of flight training in itself, you'll have to find a flight school near you. And there's usually one at an airport. In most cases, it's either going to be a flight club or a flight school. In some cases, it can actually be just a flight instructor. If you know someone who has a flight instructor certificate, sometimes they have access to an airplane, or you can rent an airplane and do your flight training that way. So that's one way you can do flight training. Flight training is going to be divided into 3 different parts in most cases. The first part for private is going to be pre-solo training. The instructor is going to give you all the knowledge that you need in order to get your first solo done. Once you do your first solo, the next step is to do a cross-country. Cross-country is flying from point A to point B. That's the goal of getting a pilot license, is to go places. So the instructor is going to teach you how to do this. And then at the very end, the last stage is going to get you ready for your final exam to go with the FAA and get your certificate. Speaking of your final exam, your practical test is at the very end of training. This is what's going to get you your license. Think about your driver's test when you were getting your license to drive your car. That's kind of the same thing here. It's 2 parts. It's a part with the oral exam, and then it's going to be a part with a flight test. It's going to be conducted by an examiner. Now there's different types of examiner. The first one is what we call a DPE, Designated Pilot Examiner. This person is not really an FAA employee. They're more of an FAA contractor. It's a pilot, a Czech pilot that has applied with the FAA, and then they go around the state to give the certificates, to give these check rides. And in this case, you're going to pay them an additional fee. There's also another option. If your flight school is approved, then you'll be able to do your final check, your check ride or your practical test with one of their employees at the flight school in itself. In most cases, you're going to have to go with a DPE. Now, a DPE is not cheap. A designated pilot examiner is going to be between $400 and $800. There's another option, which is to go with the FAA, but these are extremely difficult to get because, well, they're usually too busy doing other things. So and that's free, but in most cases, it's not an option that people follow. Before you go for that exam, that final exam with the FAA, you're going to have several things ready. First off, you're going to need a form from the FAA. Now, the FAA has a website where you apply for the certificate. It's called IACRA, IACRA. And there you're going to have to submit an application. Your flight instructor will help you do that. Will help you fill out the information and sign you off. You're going to need your written exam. We talked about this. This is what we help you do, is pass the written exam with the FAA. And then you're going to need your medical certificate. You're going to need your student pilot certificate. And then your flight instructor is going to put a bunch of endorsements in your logbook. He's going to sign off and say that you received the training, and then you can go and fly. And then you can go for your check ride. And then you're going to have to make sure you have your logbook. And then in your logbook, you're going to log all the hours that you fly. And then the examiner is going to look at it and say, okay, you've got 50 hours. You've got 15 hours of solo. You've got 30 hours of dual. You're good to go. You meet all the requirements. Now, there's more requirement than those 3, but that's basically what that person is going to do, is make sure that everything is good. If you have a bad day, which happens, all right? Everybody has a bad day, and you fail. Well, there's different options. If you fail the oral exam, which is the first part, if you fail the oral exam, then the check ride is over. Then you have to go get recurrent training with your flight instructor, and then call the DPE again, and then reschedule, and then go do the check ride again. They have a list. The DPE is going to have a list of things that they have to check. And if you miss one of them, then you're going to have to get training on that. And then the check pilot, the DPE, is going to check again, make sure you know that topic. Let's say there is something about the weather, and you fail because you don't know about the weather. Then you have to get recurrent training on the weather, and then go back with the check pilot and get that done. If you pass the oral exam, and then you go to the flight portion, and if you fail during the flight portion, then you're going to have to do the same thing. You're going to have to get recurrent training, and then you're going to have to do this again. Now, in some cases, I should say, the examiner is going to let you go through all the steps, and then at the very end, they're going to tell you, well, you failed on this, 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 and this. And then that's it. Then you can go back and do the training again. Okay? That's it. That's really all you have to do in this case in order to get your certificate. If you pass the oral, if you pass the flight, and if you had passed the written exam, you're good. You're a private pilot. Congratulations.